For this lesson, I'm going to break down the symbol Om and the sound Om. So you might have already heard Om already through your journeys because it is synonymous with yoga, and it's a very stereotypical part of yoga, such as that and Namaste and Downward Facing Dog and Sun Salutations. Those are familiar terms that are very common in media throughout the world. So you might have heard those terms and never practiced yoga. It's very common. Om is a very common symbol, but it is a sacred symbol. And I would like to describe the meaning of Om and the sound of Om because it's very important for this lesson as a part of mantra, because most mantras start and end with Om and that sound, because Om is what's thought to connect all states of consciousness together. So whenever we Om, such as at the end of a yoga practice or beginning end of a mantra or just through meditation, Om really brings us into that absolute state of bliss. And we might not want to Om in the middle, in public, or even in a yoga class. Only in my yoga classes at a studio do I Om. I very rarely Om at the end of my classes in just a general fitness facility or fitness center, just for the reason of some people may not be open to Oming just yet. It might scare people away from the practice of yoga. Not that it's meant to, but then it starts to bring that spirituality into yoga, and some people don't want that conflict in themselves with spirituality. Some people are very open to it, and others are not, and that's okay. We don't have to Om for yoga to work, but it is a symbol and a part of yoga to be practiced. That way, you know the meaning and the benefits of the sound and familiar yourself with Om, whether or not you Om on your own or never Om ever again. And oftentimes when I do offer Oming at the end of my classes at the studio, I do offer it as people don't have to join. They can Om in their minds or just sit in silence and enjoy everybody else Oming, or hum. Humming has the same effect on the brain as Oming does. So Om, let's break down the sound itself. So Om, it's that vibration. And going back to the lesson on Sanskrit, a lot of the Sanskrit is spoken from the back of the throat as opposed to English, or speaking more from the front of the mouth. So that vibration of Om in the back of the throat is really connected to that soft palate in the throat. And on the other side of the soft palate, we have our limbic system of the brain. And that limbic system, without getting too technical, controls our emotional center of the brain. So when we vibrate that emotional center, and if we have negative emotion, what that does is help us balance out our emotions, our irrational brain. So for angry, stressed, anxious, fearful, agitated, all those negative emotions that we react to, Oming is very therapeutic to counteract those negative emotions because it vibrates, stimulates that part of the brain, and sort of calms that part of the brain, brings the heart rate down, reduces the stress hormones in the body. So the brain has a fighting chance of not overreacting to a situation. So Oming is very therapeutic in that aspect, or humming. And another reason mantra, Oming, humming are very therapeutic as well is we have this nerve called the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve starts in the brain here in the cerebellum, and it branches off. So it's called a wandering nerve. That's what it means in English, a wandering nerve, because it sort of flows down and attaches to all sorts of different areas. It attaches to the heart, to the lungs, and to the gut. Also, nerve endings attached to the vocal cords of that vagus nerve. So whenever we stimulate the vocal cords and vibrate, we stimulate that nerve, and that nerve is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, where we can rest and digest, so we can relax. So whenever we vibrate those vocal cords, singing, oming, all those things, we start to relax the mind and the body through that way. So a little scientific on you. So that's the sound Om. And in history and folklore, Om was thought to be the first sound ever heard in the universe. So the first sound ever spoken was Om. And it is said if you were able to hear the earth, hear the vibration that earth vibrates at, you can hear the sound Om if you're able to hear at that frequency. So Om. Now breaking down the symbol. So the symbol looks like this. It looks like a 30. Oops, upside down. Looks like a 30. And so you might notice that I wear Om on my necklace here. I have a little part of Om on my tattoo over here, but this symbol represents all states of consciousness. So this is what Om looks like. So this lower curve here is our awake state. So we have when we're awake. So think of this as brain waves as well, going back to brainwave frequency in meditation. So this is us wide awake and alert watching this video, maybe, right? Or we could be here. So this is the dream state when we're dreaming, right? So you could be dreaming right now, just tuning me out. But wide awake, dream state. So dream state is that REM sleep where we have some brain activities because we're dreaming, but we're not controlling the thoughts. The dreams are just coming from that subconscious mind, right? And then the upper part of this looks like 3 here. That is our deep sleep state. So when we're deep sleep, no thoughts are happening at all. That's when our brainwave activity is at its least, and we're very focused on nothing. So the goal of meditation, yoga, all these things, why are we doing all that, is to get to this state even though we're consciously awake. So awakening this state here. So we have least brainwave activity, but we are aware of what's going on in our realities and not reacting to our reality, just being a witness to that awareness of the reality. And when we get into that state, how do we get into that state? This is that state there. So when we can combine these two together, we come to that little dot up on top. And what this little slash here is illusion. So in Sanskrit, this is called Maya, or illusion. So we have illusion created by the mind, by the ego, because the ego likes to judge. The ego likes to compare. The ego gets mad. The ego gets jealous. The ego feels greater than or less than, superior, inferior kind of thing. So when we perceive our reality through all these expectations and judgments, we create what's called dukkha, and dukkha means suffering. And so suffering is really created by the mind, unless somebody is physically, trying to harm you. That's obviously something out of your control, and you can't control that kind of suffering. Someone's inflicting pain on you. But mental suffering, which is probably 90% of most of our suffering is through our thoughts, can be alleviated through meditation and through realizing that we can control thoughts and not have to think about a subject matter we don't like necessarily. And I always tell my students, if it's out of your control, just surrender to what it is. If it is in your control, you can go ahead and change the things you don't like if you can. So we have to learn to be in that ebb and flow, in the contrast and in the light. There is contrast for us to learn and for us to grow. But we can't let this Maya, this illusion of the ego brain, really destroy our inner world and make us feel suffering through mental, because the body doesn't know the difference between mental suffering and physical suffering. The body doesn't know the difference if you're running away from a woolly mammoth or if you're just got in a road rage incident. Same stress hormone response, same physical response. So why let those things get into the brain and what's called poison the brain, right? Poison the mind. So when we can remove this Maya, we get to this absolute state up here, which is where we find that samadhi, that last limb of yoga, that blissful state. And we connect these two states of consciousness together. So the brainwave activity is very little, but yet we are still observing. We're not sleeping. We're wide awake in this dream and this reality while we're here, and realizing we can control where we bring our thoughts and perceptions to. So Om in a nutshell. So to end, I'll Om 3 times so you can sort of hear. You can join me or at home if you're home by yourself and don't mind that. Or you can hum. So I usually do it in 3s when I complete a practice. And we want to sit nice and tall, so you want to give a lot of space for breath, so you can Om as long as you can. And we'll get started. So that little pause at the end of Om is that absolute state where it's infinity, it goes on forever. Our consciousness can expand out to that infinite place. When we look up at the sky and the ether, it expands out to infinity. So that sound and that vibration of Om travels throughout forever and ever. Namaste.